Nigeria faces significant debt challenges despite debt relief measures. The government has implemented policies such as programs as the Medium-Term Expenditure Framework, Debt Management Office, Presidential Enabling Business Environment Council, Economic Recovery and Growth Plan, Nigerian Sovereign Investment Authority, and Nigeria's Debt Relief Fund to manage the country's debt and ensure responsible borrowing. However, the impact of government debt on economic growth remains contentious as debt levels have continued to rise steadily under the current administration. To analyze the concerns, of course, and raising this budget, this debt issue, I beg your pardon, a rising debt issue, budget deficit, and all of this, I have the Director General of the Nigerian Employers Consultative Association, that's NECA, Dr. Adewale Oyeride. Thank you so much. It's good to have you in the studio.
Thank you. Thank you for having us.
Yes. Let's start with the big story that just came in, inflation. What were you expecting? I'm sure it was clear that there was going to be an increase.
Absolutely. You know, with coming from our recent experience, or experiences as I'll call it, the cash squeeze, the self-inflicted cash squeeze, the challenging macroeconomic environment. So you probably were not expecting anything less, and it's a pointer that things are not very well. It's a pointer that things are not okay with the business community. It's a pointer that there is need for us to review, take a deep review of our macroeconomic policy, the fiscal and monetary policy. There is also a need for us to start looking at our citizens. What is the effect of this continuous increase, 4 times increase, 4 consecutive increase of inflation rate? There is need for us to take a deep cognizance, a deep look at how exactly is this affecting our citizens. You know, the primary role of government is to protect the citizens.
Yes.
Is to create policies, create programs and systems that will alleviate the challenges or the challenge of the citizens. And if we are not doing that, then I think the right thing to do is to sit back and take a cursory look at all the policies that we have and see which one is not working. As someone said, it's better to be inconsistent than to continue in error. So if those things are not working, I think we should be humble enough to take a cursory look at how well have these policies, how well have they served us as a country. If we are not doing that, as the analysis I gave the last time, was you find yourself in a hole, the first thing you stop doing is stop digging. If you continue digging, you continue going down, and it becomes much more difficult for you to manage all these issues as they come.
Interesting stuff. Well, before that, we had that headache of this debt issue. And DMO is saying that decades of operating budget deficit is what has put us where we are. That's by successive governments. What's your take with regards to our deficit and budget service? It's becoming cumbersome. It's scary. That's the word now.
You know, it's a few years ago we had a debt forgiveness by our debtors, and you imagine in about 2 decades or thereabout, we are now owing, our debt profile is over 70 trillion by the federal government and over 5 trillion by the states and the FCT. Now, without looking at why we have borrowed, you know, even if you are rebuilding a nation or if you are rebuilding a system that's crashed totally, then you wonder, okay, what exactly will you have used the 77 trillion for? And if you look around, you know, even while the government has done a bit, within the context of their analysis, creditably well in provision of infrastructure, in provision of some basic amenities. But the reality remains, we have 77 trillion in debt by the federal government. We have over 5 trillion in debt by all the states and the FCT. So the challenge is this, and it goes beyond the debt, and that is the issue that we should focus on. It goes beyond the debt. It's like cancer. You know, once the cancer has taken root and it doesn't have anything to feed on outside, what it does basically is to start feeding on the inside. So the body will start killing itself. You know, there will be an internal combustion, and that is what we are seeing now. You know, the debt portfolio is so high. You know, was it the World Bank or the IMF that also warned that, look, Nigeria should watch its propensity to borrow? That means that a signal that even our creditors might not borrow us again. Our revenue, at the point the Minister of Finance said, our revenue per month is not sufficient to service our debt. Those are signals. And the consequences for us, the consequences for us is so grave. Because if you can't manage your income, if you can't manage revenue, the DMO said is revenue shortfall. How do you arrive at the point of revenue shortfall? Our critical revenue portfolio is oil. Yes. Now you can't control the quantum of oil that you sell. Yes. OPEC controls that. You can't control the price of the oil that you sell. OPEC controls price also. Now, it's now left for you that to make sure that if OPEC said you are going to produce, you've been allocated 1.8 million barrels per day, you make sure that you produce maximally so that you can generate the income. Yeah. Now, we have issue of oil theft that has caused that revenue shortfall.
Less than 1 million.
Now, the challenge is this now. And this is where the cancer that I mentioned, as it's rarely said. If you can't deal with the things you can deal with, then as the cancer will start eating the body itself, then you unconsciously start destroying your institutions that should help you to grow. Recently, there is this fiscal policy measures that came up, and we have made representation to the powers that be, to the Minister of Finance, to the President. You cannot continue to tax and overtax organizations in the manufacturing sector, in the larger business community. You cannot continue to tax them because you are looking for revenue. It's a double-edged sword. Yeah. The more you tax them, the more it becomes difficult for them to operate. The more it becomes difficult for them to operate, the more they will look at their own systems and do the needful. First, those taxes, part of it will go back to the citizens, to the consumers whose purchasing power is already eroded. Some of those taxes, if they can bear it, they probably will shut down or move to other climes. If they shut down or they reduce their production capacity, they will lay off staff. Now, you are making revenue because you want to generate revenue. You've created so many other problems in the context of unemployment. You've encouraged smuggling. You've encouraged the counterfeiting of goods and services. And you've created a monster in unemployment rate. So our view is this. Look, government need to apply deliberately, stick to the fiscal policy measures, stick to the fiscal discipline measures that it has created for itself. If we don't go back and deal with our indiscipline, our recklessness in borrowing and our recklessness in spending, we will continue to borrow and continue to create burdens for organized businesses and continue to create burdens for generations yet unborn.
Some will argue that borrowing really might not be the problem, is what you channel the resources to. That's what some would argue. And on the other side, I will also have to ask that, what other options do we have if we don't borrow at this time?
Borrowing itself is not a bad thing in the context of organized businesses. You borrow for productive activities. We borrow to fund projects that can pay its own debt. Unfortunately, we have not been doing that. 2 weeks ago, there was a report that the Nigerian Railway borrowed so much to establish and then made so little that they could not even meet their obligations. So if it is so easy to run a business, then why has the government not been able to run the Nigerian Railway? So why we say, well, what are the options available? You control the things you can control. We have oil, and oil remains the mainstay for us. Then why can't we deal with the issue of oil theft? A lot has been done in recent weeks or recent months, but why can't we face the issue of oil theft squarely? If you can
and increase production.
You can increase production, you meet your OPEC quota. For us, we feel it's not rocket science. Meet your OPEC quota, you make the quantum of dollars that you can make, then we deal with the issue of fuel subsidy. Yeah, fuel subsidy removal the conversation was postponed to, probably because basically we postponed the evil days. It has been postponed now. Let's deal with the issue of refineries. Why can't our refineries work? If you deal with the issue of refineries, the quantum of money, cash, that you are spending on subsidy, over 6-7 trillions. As at the last count last week, we had that subsidy for 2023 might run into 8 trillion. If you can save that quantum of cash on subsidy, if you can deal with your issues of oil theft, you have sufficient cash to meet your basic needs. Those are not rocket science. We need to exercise this political will to deal with those things that are within our control, and then our issues of revenue will be substantially resolved. Not losing out the issue of trade and non-oil exports. It is time for government also to take a cursory look, the new administration, on how do we diversify our revenue base. Not the economy now. We have our Greek, we have the economy diversified. But our revenue base, the need for us to diversify it through non-oil export and through trade. This is the time for us to have a reset within the context of the management of our economy.
Interesting stuff. Going through some research, all around this debt thing. It's been a running story. Yeah. I saw a breakdown somewhere and says every Nigerian owes about 368,421 naira. That's the debt incurred, considering this figure that we are looking at. Now, I want us to look at it in this way that what does this mean also for the life of a citizen? Now, we've talked about the businesses, but of course, businesses has to do with people too. So what sort of life would one live in this kind of situation where this debt continues to rise?
If it's that simple, you probably will transfer your own part government, but it's more complicated than that. It's the cumulative effect of it. Because if you look at the old figure itself, the more the debt, the more you have to service, the more money you spend servicing. And like our situation where you have issues with revenue, it becomes much more difficult for you to service. And now, if you are not servicing, then you are running the risk of not being able to borrow again.
Yeah.
Your credit rating at the international level will be going down, then you will not be able to fund infrastructures. So, and if you are not able to fund infrastructures, if your capital inflow is reducing, that means your foreign reserve will also be going down. And if your foreign reserve is going down, that also means your ability to fund imports will be going down. So your option, your dangerous option, I call it dangerous option, is the cancer analogy. Then you start feeding on the internal nutrients. You start killing your internal organs. And those internal organs for us is organized businesses. If you can't meet that, then where government will focus on, look at organized businesses and let's increase tax. And the more you are increasing tax, the more you are incapacitating that sector or that group. And the more you incapacitate them, the more problems you are causing for yourself. As I mentioned, inflation will naturally increase, as we have seen. Your unemployment rate will increase. Yeah. You encourage smuggling because if the local businesses are not competitive, then you make smuggling, you make it quite interesting for people to smuggle. You make doing businesses outside your shores, you make it much more interesting. And it's I said, it's a double-edged sword for us with the Africa Continental Free Trade.
Exactly. I wanted to say, where are we? We've been talking about it. Are we taking our place?
It's saddening. It's really saddening. And we have made representation to the Minister of Finance. We've made representation to the government to say, look, the 2023 fiscal and monetary measures that just came out that propose to increase excise duty across board between 20 to 100%. The new green tax that is introduced, we've appealed to government. And look, this is not the time to increase this. Let government magnanimously suspend the implementation of that 2023 fiscal monetary pressures. And let's go back to the 2022 roadmap. There's a roadmap that has specified how these things should be handled between 2022 and 2024. And in the middle of 2023, we are changing the goalposts and sending a dangerous signal to foreign investors. Because if your policies are not stable, if within the twinkle of an eye, there's policy somersault, then a rational investor will think twice before bringing investments to this country. And the less investment we have, the less our capacity to grow.
It's 14 days to the beginning of a new administration. No matter how we say it now, and a lot of agendas being set. Everyone is setting an agenda. But for me, I see this, that is necessary. It is very important and necessary that there is this handshake between the private sector, the organized private sector like NECA and the likes, with government this time around, to let them know where the shoe really pinches, so that they can, come up with policies. Because if you are not enabled, jobs will not be created.
Absolutely.
Government cannot create these jobs. I understand that for a given. So what would you be saying? What will you be handing out? What will you be saying out to them? We always like to use that word, low-hanging fruits.
Well, let's commend the current government. They've shown some level of openness in engaging, and that's one of the reasons why we have also escalated this issue to the president. Good. The president has taken, in time past, has taken some very proactive steps in relieving the organized businesses of the challenges that we face. But for the incoming government, I think there is need to deepen that engagement. We said from the point of policy formulation, you can't formulate policies over people's heads. Yeah. A former president, was it a former president or a former president-elect once said, you cannot shave a man's head behind him. He has to be there. He has to be there. So if you are creating policies, we have to first look at how will that policy affect every other sector of our lives. You can't say we are coming up with a tax policy, a monetary or fiscal policy, without looking at what are the consequential effects on our life as a whole. If you are looking for revenue, it's easy to say let's increase tax. But while you increase tax, you must also be cognizant of the effect of that increase on organized businesses, on the disposable income of workers and Nigerians, and on every other issue that affects your citizens. So first, we must deepen our engagement, and this is speaking to the incoming administration. They must deepen their engagement with organized businesses within the context of policy formulation, policy implementation, and policy appraisal. We must look at these things and look at it together. Also, secondly, they must also take a critical look on the issue of the oil theft. We can't, we've said this over and over again, that look, spirits don't steal oil. They must step up the efforts to stop this issue of oil theft. If you stop the oil theft, then you've increased your capacity to generate revenue. And lastly, the issue of fuel subsidy. They must make sure that, look, we fix the refineries. And we know a lot of work is going on at the Port Harcourt and Warri refinery. We must couple with the private that we expect Dangote to come up in the beautiful and wonderful work that Dangote has done in Bejuleki. Yeah. Coupled with that, then in a short while, we should be able to deal with this issue of fuel subsidy and save that quantum of money. It's a huge amount of money that can save us all the stress. Then the focus on tax, the focus on tax we then progressively reduce. We don't have problems with tax in the organized private sector, but the tax must be fair, it must be reasonable, and it must be within the context of the realities of our economy. We can't say in America, in Europe, they are paying so much tax. Then, look, let's compare apple to apple. Let's compare orange to orange. So those are the low-hanging fruit for us. We deal with those issues, then the incoming government will start on a seemingly stable note. They have their challenges worked out. They have the humongous, multi-dimensional challenge that they will face. They have it already, and so once you know your problem, they are half solved. Yes. So they understand the problems, but they cannot solve those problems by inflicting more pain on organized businesses, and they cannot solve those problems by shutting out engagement with organized businesses.
It's good to have you, Mr. Adewale Oyerinde. He is the Director General of Nigerian Employers Consultative Association, NECA. Thank you for starting the week with us on Business Nigeria. We appreciate this.
Our pleasure.
Thank you so much.